How are you feeling? You got John Riggs here checking out some different Nintendo games at different price points. Well, you see all these video games and you hear about them, or you see them at conventions, or you see them at video game stores, and you're like, well, this game and this game look kind of the same, but why is this one $5 and why is this one $500? Well, in this video, we're looking at Nintendo platformers specifically, starting off with a game that goes for about $5 and ending with a game that goes for over $2,000. Yeah, good luck shelling that out. Watching the channel is supported, and I can't thank you enough. However, I do sell my custom air fresheners. I also sell my homebrews, the video games I make. They're all available in my shop online. You can check out a link in the description below. Thank you much. Well, we gotta start with, let's say about a $5 game, Mickey Mouse Capade. I actually have a lot of fun with Mickey Mouse Capade. You find it for about $5 at conventions. I've seen it go for about that or so. This kicked off the Capcom Disney collaborations, and some of the best NES games are the Capcom Disney games, like DuckTales, like Rescue Rangers, things like that. And Mickey Mouse Capade, although kind of dated and kind of early in the NES life cycle, it's still a lot of fun and still definitely worth checking out, especially if you're an old school Disney fan, because you'll recognize, not all of them, but you'll recognize some of the characters in the Disney shows might be enemies in this game too. Simple enough to play, it's kind of kidsy, kind of cartoony, but still actually provides a bit of a challenge, so it's definitely worth checking out, and for $5, totally worth it. Bumping up to about $10, we have Little Nemo the Dream Master. Of all the games on the NES, Little Nemo the Dream Master could have been one of those games that could have been like $100 and been like, well, yeah, it's worth $100. It's Little Nemo the Dream Master. But thankfully, they made a bazillion of them, and it's a good thing because it's such a good game. It's one of the best. Little Nemo the Dream Master has everything you're supposed to be looking for in a Nintendo platformer. It has that great graphics, great sound, great music. The levels are huge, so it gives you a lot to explore to find all the keys to move on, and it has that extra gimmick, it has that extra element that doesn't exist in other games, and this one happens to be the fact that you can feed the candy to the creatures to make them go to sleep, to ride them, or to use them, or to utilize them to complete each stage here. Little Nemo the Dream Master, $10, it's a deal. Tiny Toon Adventures for the NES. Now, Tiny Toon Adventures, the first one, I've seen it go for like $10, $15 somewhere in there. We'll just call it 15. And the thing with this game is, it's one of the best platformers on the NES. Mario 3 is great. I mean, the Super Mario Brothers games, you can't go wrong. But Tiny Toon Adventures, again, exactly what you need in a Nintendo game. There are so many levels in this game. Now, this came from a time where you couldn't just save your game along the way. So if you're beating this game, you're playing it in one sitting, however long that takes. I don't know if it's like half an hour to an hour or something like that. I haven't timed myself. I don't know. You play as Buster in this one. That's the blue bunny, the blue boy bunny. And then you can choose which character you want to also play as. They can switch between, the Dizzy or the other ones. So I'm drawing a blank. I always draw a blank. Why can't I remember them every time I talk about this game? You'd figure I'd know by now. Oh God. Okay. Tiny Toon Adventures for the NES. Man, $15. Again, it's a great deal on that one, and definitely worth having in your collection. If you're looking for like great NES platformers that aren't gonna, break the bank, it is for sure worth having. Now, we just talked about Super Mario Bros. 3, and I would be remiss if we didn't mention Mario 3 in a platformers NES game video. Now, with Mario 3, I've seen it go for about $20 or so, and again, 100% worth it. It's a lot of people's favorite game of all time. I remember first playing it at a Play Choice 10. I believe it was somewhere in Southern California, but they had a Play Choice 10 before it was officially released on the NES as a cartridge. So I played it that summer, and then later on I started to see it pop up in stores. Of course, I first heard about it from The Wizard, that movie. Gotta love that. And that was my introduction to Mario 3 anyway, and then you see it everywhere. They really capitalized on it, but it's also one of the best. It's so good. And $20, yeah, it's worth it. There's a game called Wampum, which goes for about $50. And this is starting to get to that point where it's like, it was $50 when it was brand new. Why am I still paying $50 for a used game? But Wampum is also an excellent, excellent, excellent game. If you liked Shovel Knight. It's not a lot like Shovel Knight, but the fact that you have a downward thrust, just like you do with DuckTales a little bit. Again, great game. You have your spear that you can, attack enemies with, and you can also, dagger down, so to speak, to jump on their heads to defeat them that way too. And you can choose which levels you want to go to. Anytime you can choose which level you want to go to. It's always good news in my book, and Wampum is an excellent game. Wampum came from, it's the sequel to a game that we didn't get in Japan. There was a first one that came out, and we didn't get that one, but then they reskinned the sequel to one where you play as a native boy. There's that play on words. It's Wampum, and then there's that. I don't know if something like that would fly by today's standards, but it's an excellent game. It's definitely worth checking out. Well, we can talk about Mega Man. We're talking OG Mega Man. Not Mega Man 2, not Mega Man 4, not Mega Man X, not Mega Man whatever. We're talking Mega Man. From the time, and I remember this time, trust me, I was around. It was 10,000 years ago, I was there, whatever the meme is. Was it 3,000 years? Doesn't matter. I was there in a time before Mega Man 2 when there was just Mega Man, and I loved it. Now, Mega Man 1 plays the slightest bit different than the other ones, only because they seem to add a new thing in each Mega Man game. So you have to like remove all the other things to the first one where you don't have Rush. You don't have a slide, like the foot slide thingy. You cannot charge up your Mega Blaster. You can pause it. There is a pause button along with your item selection button to use the robot boss's weapons against the other ones and everything. But man, yeah, this goes for about 90 bucks or so. It's one of the more expensive Mega Man games, but it's the one that started it all. And for $90, I mean, it's fun to see where it came from, but it's you know, it's Mega Man. It's Mega Man. And it has the best box art of all time. Of course it does. Oh, and into triple digits now with Rockin' Cats at $140. $140 for a Nintendo game? Oh, trust me, it gets way worse. And Rockin' Cats, it's pretty cool. It's actually kind of fun. You play as a cat with this kind of, it reminds me of like the punching thing from Who Framed Roger Rabbit, but with that you can also grab onto items, like not just punch the enemies, but you can also grab onto items or grab onto ledge to swing around and fling yourself and all that too. The levels are channels, which is interesting. It's a very, very fun game, but $140, it's a pretty steep price tag to add to something like this. How about Wacky Races? Get this, $320. Oh my goodness. Well, Wacky Races came out late in the NES life cycle, and you play as Muttley, the dog with emphysema, who has that specific laugh. It's a Hanna-Barbera game. I loved Wacky Races, the cartoon. I loved Wacky Races, the cartoon. Well, the cartoon was interesting because the cartoon featured the different racers who had different cars, and the different cars had usually different characteristics depending on the driver. And Muttley was the bad guy's dog, that, you know, Dick Dastardly. It was his pet dog, and of course, for the most part, they would usually try to, you know, sabotage the race so they could get the upper hand, and it always backfired. But in this game, why not play as Muttley? Why not play as Muttley? And it's actually a pretty decent platformer, believe it or not. You can bark, you can chomp, the barking, and then also like bombs and stuff like that, and where you can spin your tail to kind of float down. Those are optional upgrades as you're playing through the game, playing through the levels and all that too. Different worlds, a few different levels. The boss enemies are the characters from the show, from the cartoon. So it's kind of fun to see, like, oh, which one's going to be next? You know, who's the boss going to be in this one and everything. It's a fun one, and it might be worth checking out. You can emulate it, play it however some other way. $320 is a pretty steep price tag for something like this, featuring Muttley of all people. Can you do the laugh? I'm going to try to do the laugh. That backfired. I should not have done that. Deep Cut. There's a J-drama that came out in the 90s. Hitotsu Yane no Shita is the name of this show. It's called Under the Same Roof. It was a show. I loved it. They had 2 seasons of it. And Muttley dates back to this J-drama, this Japanese drama. Muttley is featured in it as one of the characters, like the main character's like icon in a way. I don't know. I remember. I just now remember that. Good Lord. Useless trivia. Here we go. I'm gonna try one more time. I can't do it. It's hard. Kid Clown goes for about $450. Kid Clown, again, a great game, a huge price tag because it was like limited release late in the NES life cycle. And Kid Clown is a fun one. You play as a clown and you blow these balloons that you can also use as a weapon, or you can also use to stand on to jump up into other platforms. I had this game and I sold it for, I think, $50. Probably 8 years ago, 7 or 8 years ago. But I know where it went, and it's in a great home. So I'm actually very happy for the person who bought it. I know exactly where it is. And even if I had it right now, I would just sell it again or trade it or something anyway. So Panic Restaurant is such a great game too. Another game from Taito, again, a late release game. These games are super getting expensive now. Panic Restaurant goes for about $765, believe it or not. Good Lord. But it's a cooking game. You cook. You're a chef.
Yes, chef.
The items and upgrades are like a spoon or a fork or plates that you can throw. The enemies are all like food items, which is wonderful. Great animation. It's so funny to see this game, and it's such a great game. I wish Switch would just make a Taito collection of all the great NES games and just put them all into one thing and say, okay, here you go, re-release it, done. Because there's so many great late release NES games like Panic Restaurant, like Wacky Races. Now, it'd be hard to do because Wacky Races is licensed, isn't it? Oh, terrible. Well, fortunately, there's a 1,000 ways to play all these great NES games from back in the day. The cartridges work great, and everything else works great too. Do you have the Flintstone Surprise at Dinosaur Peak? It goes for about anywhere between $1,200. I seen it recently for $1,500. It's a doozy. Yay. Okay, I got one. I'm not going to hold on to it long, though. And again, it's a great game. It's a fun game. You play as Fred Flintstone. You play as Barney Rubble, his best friend next door neighbor, as you go through the stages, and the two different characters have two different characteristics that one can do that the other one cannot do, which makes it for a great game. But at that price, oof. 1,000. I remember there was a time where it wasn't that much, but just, you know, today's standard. Again, looking a little bit at price charting, looking a little bit at what I find at conventions. Yeah, it's between 12 and 15 I've seen it for. Yeah, it's up there. But it's not Little Samson. Good old Little Samson, officially licensed by the Nintendo Entertainment System, published by Taito. You're looking at over $2,000. According to price charting, $2,145. Just saying that price alone made my voice drop an octave. $2,145. Imagine that. Imagine that. The game system itself sold for $100, $200, whatever it was. A $2,000, good lord. I always think back on all the times I passed it up too. Even when I was going for a complete set, it was the one game I never had. Because I was just like, I'm not paying $300 for a Nintendo game. Well, little did we know now, you know, sure. But I mean, again, nobody knew these things. I did play it back in the day though. My local rental store, Crazy Mike's Video, did have a copy of it on Nintendo, and even though I was still playing Super Nintendo and Genesis at the time, I would go back to my old NES every once in a while. And I was like, oh, that looks like a pretty fun game, I'll rent it for the weekend, and I did, and I beat it almost immediately, because it's not the hardest game in the world, but it's still a lot of fun. It's still worth checking out. It's super fun. You play as Little Samson and his friends, and once you go through the first stage or whatever, that's when you can start choosing and selecting which ones you want to play as, or which, you know, like you can switch on the fly. It's like, oh, I need to go over there, because the different ones have, the dragon can hover for a bit, or the mouse can like climb up, you know, climb up on ceilings and stuff like that. So you have to swap it out or everything. Great game, fantastic game. They could remake it and it would be awesome. It had to be that game that just became the thing that people talked about. It wasn't always the most. There was actually a few years there where Flintstones, The Surprise at Dinosaur Peak was the #1 game, the most expensive game at the time, whatever it went for at the time. And then Little Samson was like the $500 game, while, you know, Flintstones went for $700 or something. But, you know, things change, and here we are. It's a lot of money to be spending on old plastic and circuit boards and stuff. Now, which one do you think is the most worth it for you? Now, to me, it's hard to argue that Little Nemo the Dream Master at $10 is going to be the best bang for your buck. Mario 3 for $20, can't go wrong there either. But Tiny Toon Adventures for $15, come on now. Tiny Toon Adventures, what? The best. Now, this is just covering the Nintendo platformers, but I've also done this video using the same idea. Let's look at different prices of games from cheap to expensive. So check out those videos as well, and we'll see you super soon.